I suddenly went from being a very big skeptic to literally believing UFOs are real, UAP are real. I was all over the world, and it was a very strange. People in my local bar here in France went, Monsieur Professor, the alien guy. I think today in 2025, we have the tools with the James Webb Space Telescope to find biological signatures, which I think we probably have on different exoplanets, because it's a massive thing to tell to the human race that we're not alone. So a classic case was this very famous remote viewer who was asked by the CIA to find a downed spy plane in Africa. Hal Puthoff and Russell Turg have told me, and Uri Geller, is that the confirmation in the future, her future, that she was right, and as an emotional effect on her, was visible in her past.
Chris Lehto, welcome to Lehto Files.
Okay, welcome to Lehto Files. Today, we're joined by Simon Holland. He's a seasoned science filmmaker and the creator behind the successful YouTube channel, Professor Simon. So Simon has a rich background, includes working with the BBC's Specialist Factual Department. He's also dedicated his career to producing insightful science and history films, which is quite interesting. His channel, his YouTube channel, delves into compelling topics such as SETI discoveries, the recent BLC-1 discovery that we'll talk about. He also looks into UAP phenomena and the quest for extraterrestrial intelligence. So thank you so much, Simon, for being back on the show. It's great to see you.
Chris, it's an absolute pleasure. I enjoy I stop everything and watch your YouTube channel as soon as you post anything. It's great. Yeah, no, I think social media science is where it's at. I mean, I think we no longer live in a world of the BBC and whoever. I think channels like yours, you're asking the questions that nobody else is asking anymore. I think mainstream media are very weak on breaking science stories, and I think people like us, we're pushing, hopefully asking questions. So yeah, no, it's good, and and also through social media, people contact you, and we get interesting topics to talk about. So what would you like to talk about today, Chris?
Well, I guess first I'm interested in how you went from working at the BBC, making all these documentaries, to now your life as in your very cool underground basement making YouTube videos. How did that journey happen? What's your take on it?
Oh yeah, right. So I joined Ealing Film Studios in 1978, which was part of the BBC, and as a film editor, working on 16 and 35 mm film on things like John le Carre's Tinker Tailor and dramas for the BBC. Then in the 80s, I transitioned as the world did into videotape and computer editing, and worked in news and current affairs. So I was very, very close to things, the Cold War, to breaking history, the Thatcher regime, the Reagan regime, Gorbachev's strategic arms limitation, SDI. And that was really a great interest of mine. I met a lot of those leading players, Gorbachev and Thatcher and all those kind of people. It was a really fascinating part of my career. I've always had a real interest in science, though, and luckily the BBC, again, at the time, late 80s and 90s, had a very strong specialist factual department who would make history and science films. The flagship of the BBC Science programs is a program called Horizon, which is very similar to the PBS Nova program, which I also worked on. And I very much enjoyed collaborating with producers, and we did things like Yellowstone, Yellowstone supervolcano, and mega tsunamis, and lots of films and history that the BBC used to do really well. It seems that media has changed a lot. I then retired, and I'm very happy living with my lovely wife Dorothy here in France. And the first thing, Chris, that I realized is that very few of the really great ideas that I'd come across actually ever got made as TV. So a science program might make 5 programs a year, and there was hundreds of great ideas. We used to go, what about ET? And they would go, the BBC would go, we don't do flying saucers, and I go, well. It's a really interesting story, and what's really going on at HARP in Alaska. And they go, well, that's secret. So I came retired thinking I will try and do the stories which the television doesn't do. And that's how it started. And then I realized that the whole question of UAP started coming up. I was not really that into it. My eyes were open very much with Rendlesham Forest. It seemed to me that the Rendlesham Forest incident and meeting John Burroughs, U.S. Air Force, who was injured by something and fought along many years to get a settlement and proper health care through the VA, was the living person who had encountered something. And so working with John and James Warrow and others, that was a real eye-opener to me. I suddenly went from being a very big skeptic to literally believing UFOs are real, UAP are real. I read things like the Condon report. Now living in France, I read about OVNI, UFOs in France. They are real. And I just thought, I want to know what's going on, like you.
Yes, without a doubt, I'm extremely curious, and I
Yeah.
love your viewpoints. Your angles is different, right? You're obviously not in the UFO community per chance, but you
No.
are, I think, a critical member of the UFO community from the angles that your perspective that you take on it, but particularly about Rendlesham Forest and
Yeah.
this recent release with Jake Barber. Do you think it is related? Does Jake Barber's case make sense from what you investigated in Rendlesham?
Um, that I don't know how it relates, apart from, I mean, obviously the big visual reveal of the Jake Barber story was this egg object, but we can't ignore the other part of Jake's story, which was kind of like hard to talk about and hard to accept. And that does relate to Rendlesham Forest, is in the way that the human body is psychically connected to UAP. I think most UAP incidents do have a psychic connection. Certainly, humans are affected by different frequencies. In the Rendlesham Forest case, some of the injuries that John Burroughs and others, by the way, had were emblematic of certain types of high energy physics. Whether it was man-made or whether it was some type of force that was unleashed from Earth, or whether it was extraterrestrial, we don't know. But certainly, high up people, even like Kit Green, who was the chief medical officer for the CIA, and Gary Nolan, are very interested in people who have survived UAP encounters. I'm sure you have had. There are many ex-Air Force people or people in the Air Force who have had encounters with UAP who, who who sadly have been injured. And I think that's a very interesting way of trying to understand what UAP are.
Yeah, Gary Nolan, he was in that the first release. I think there's going to be more releases. I saw Jake Barber has on his X. He started an X now, and he said
Oh, yeah.
that News Nation will release the full 2.5 hour interview. So I think without a doubt we're going to get more information. And he mentioned a white egg, and he also mentioned an eight gon. He called it an eight gon, I think is what it actually came
Yeah.
to, which it
Yeah.
was actually eight, a disc essentially, like that had 8 sections. And I think that's an octagon actually, but he called it an
That's
eight
what
gon
I
for
heard.
some reason.
No, he mentioned this eight guy. Yeah, and the egg. Somebody, I'm continually going back to UAP and UFO probability of sighting is at 80%. are prosaic everyday objects that somebody who sees don't understand. But that leaves a whole 20% of unknown. But according to military, um, that 20%, a lot of it might be secretive man-made technology that somebody knows what they are, but don't want to admit. And then a small proportion, and the proportion which is very interesting, is the genuinely unknown, the unknown anomalous phenomenon, which absolutely exists. I mean, I think a lot of people see me being rather skeptical, but if I had to wear a t-shirt, I would say UAP are real. I mean, they are. The UAP are seen all over the world. They're not just in a farmer's field in Wisconsin. You know, they are genuinely international, as a UAP needs to be. And many countries have actually admitted that UAP are something that their military and governments are looking into. It's actually quite weird that the United States are still debating that when, for example, France, Brazil, and the United Kingdom, official position from the MOD and other nations are UAP are real. That they've been seen and measured, by very good observers like who understand a single point light source could be something flying rather than a flying saucer. UAPs have been seen.
Well, I thought the UK, I guess I didn't know the UK's stance. I thought they were even more skeptical as a government organization than the US, but you're saying that the UK has admitted that UAPs are
No,
real.
that's how it's been reported. I think it's been misreported, and I think, yeah, the big insight that the UK know what UAP are came from a report done in the year 2000 by a ex fighter pilot who was also a physics major, retired from the RAF, an MOD position, and was probably working for a large British defense contractor that will remain nameless. And he was commissioned to write something called the Condign Report. And in the Condign Report, the opening paragraph is UAP are real. They are not a threat to national security, but they are a potential threat to airmen. He says men. If a UAP materializes close to an aircraft, especially while close, by maneuvering close to the ground, they could actually be a threat to aircraft and personnel. So that's the MOD's position. No national security threat, real, and potentially a hazard in airspace.
Okay. And I guess your angle on this, the white egg, is you're investigating alternate theories that this could be some sort of
Yeah.
vacuum drone or high altitude surveillance system. Can you describe that and what you found?
Yeah, yeah. All right. So yeah, so I'm going back to what I said a minute ago. This looking at what people see, 80% I can are prosaic everyday objects, and really it's super. I would never take those cases on. Thank you, Midwest, for saying it was JetBlue or Ryanair. I mean, yeah, I mean, many cases you can just look at, if you've got good data, that people just see Venus, and I really am not interested in those cases. But what I am interested in is the 20%. And that 20% is a mixture of secretive military technology and genuine extraterrestrials or unknown. And I think that's where I'm interested in. Forget the provable stuff. I mean, that's pretty simple stuff to say, you can work out what it was. But I'm very intrigued in knowing what might be out there under development. And one of the possibilities that this egg object that Jake Barber and News Nation revealed could be is that it might be something called HAPS, which is high altitude systems used for a long loitering drone. It was the right size. The egg shape is very emblematic of a good engineering design for a pressure buoyant craft. It was rather small, so it might have just been a test vehicle. But for somebody like Jake, who wasn't read into what was being developed, to see an egg 20 foot wide, 20 foot long, white, no visible means of propulsion, no cockpit, unmanned, and to retrieve it with his long line and his helicopter, if he didn't know what it was, I would agree with him. You would think it was an unknown object. It might be of ET existence, but without really knowing what it was, I don't want to say it was I mean, it obviously wasn't a UAP, which is more phenomenon based. I don't necessarily think it was a flying saucer. I think it could easily be a man-made experimental craft, because I've also heard a lot about the DOE, not the DOD, but the Department of Energy, producing long loitering, high altitude, buoyant craft for organizations like the National Reconnaissance Office. And one of the technologies that they might have been using, thanks very much to a researcher in Canada called Josh Bernard, is that it could be using this vacuum drone technology, which definitely exists technically. So again, if you didn't know what it was, you would definitely think a white egg was weird. So I'm just looking at that, but I'm open-minded.
It's interesting too if you think back to Arrow's release, and I just had an interview with James Fox, and he said that the
Right.
current actual Arrow director Kozlowski, he said that Kozlowski told James Fox that he can't release anything at all without getting approval. He can't even part his hair without getting approval. And that's what he told James Fox. And that's the current director. The previous director, Kirkpatrick, was, completely anti any of this thing, any of this stuff, and looks like he may have been actively covering it up.
Yeah.
But the point is, even despite the fact that it was Kirkpatrick, they released that report where they said it was over 500 UAPs around the world. And the most prevalent object was actually round spherical objects.
Mm.
That's the most prevalent. And if you look off the east coast of the US, Ryan Graves was actually seeing all these objects. When I look at the gimbal now, actually, I think the gimbal could be one of these round spherical objects, actually using some sort of advanced propulsion system. So the argument that it is a reverse engineering craft and that the government has been actively keeping it secret or its advanced technology does seem to make sense to me, that they're keeping the secret. And then what could have happened is maybe they had one of these objects fail during a test. And so they actually got the retrieval team to go out, effect a combat search and rescue, but effectively bring this thing back under night ops so that you don't want people to know what you're doing. So you're going to keep it very secret. It's going to be hush hush. You're going to use military operation tactics. So you'll probably use MVGs. You're going to use covert lighting so nobody can even see you from a distance, right? We used covert lighting as F-16 pilots. And it really is amazing to see covert lighting in action because you put the MVGs up and it's completely dark, can be completely black. And then if you put the MVGs down, if you have a covert flashlight, it will illuminate everything. So it's amazing to use covert lighting. On our F-16s, actually, we have a switch where you go from your regular lighting to your overt lighting, and now you have your flashers, but you can only see them with the night vision goggles. So I think
so. If you're in a flight of multiple F-16s, you can get navigation and strobe lights which are invisible to an external observer, but you can look at wingmen and people. Ah, right. Okay.
100%. Yeah, exactly. It's called covert lighting, and we have you're in a combat zone. You're 100% going to run all covert lighting.
Oh yeah, I like it. I want one.
It's amazing. Yeah, and you use yeah, because you're flying in visual formations. So in order to fly in a visual formation, you need to be able to see the other pilot. You need to be able to see the other plane. but you don't want to give away your position to the enemy, obviously. So
Right.
what we use covert lighting. They have the same thing on the ground. They have and you can see with the FLIR pod, which is quite interesting, a forward-looking infrared with the targeting pod.
Right.
You can look on the ground and this video, if it is legitimate and it is a legitimate crash retrieval,
Yeah.
where it either crashed on its own or we shot it down, as Jake Barber
Yeah.
alleges, is that's why you're not going to have some fancy lift operation, right? That's why you're not going to have like a truck
Uh,
that's already set up to receive it. And
uh,
that's why the video is all in infrared, because it's probably not even lit up by regular lights. You may be able to only see this lighting with night vision devices, and so people are like, oh, why is it using that crappy sling? And why is there no area? Why are they just dropping it out in the desert?
yeah.
On the ground? It's a crash retrieval. These guys, they're probably just sitting at home, eating dinner or something, and then they get a call like, "Hey, go," or
Right.
more likely you have on alert. But my guess is it's a small team. It's not a very big team. If you have a really dedicated force of operators like Jake Barber, right? He was a combat controller. He knows
Yeah.
how to fly these helicopter systems. He knows how to call in
Right.
aircraft, and he knows how to probably combat search and rescue things. So
Yeah.
it's probably a small team that just goes out, secures the object in the dark, right? Nobody's going to see anything, and then you're going to pull it out in the dark of night, right? I mean, the biggest way to keep it secret and covert is less people.
Dark.
I would use if you can use three people to get this job done because they know what they're doing and they have advanced technology, advanced capabilities. That's what you're going to use. You're not going to use a big giant, 20-person team to go out and secure it. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think that explains, in my mind, a lot of this the video that we did see.
One person made a very humorous comment, and they said, as a comment on my YouTube channel, they said it was very convenient that an extraterrestrial crashed in a secure range. Why didn't it crash, into McDonald's? I mean, yeah, I mean, so that would imply that it was brought down, or it was a vehicle being used in, maybe it could have been extraterrestrial that had been, made human, but it was obviously the event took place in an area, in an in an area which was closed to the public. So I mean,
Yeah, the other thing is helicopters are very slow, right? Well, we make fun of them as the fighter jets.
yeah, yeah.
And the most complicated thing you're going to have in a combat search and rescue, I was in charge of the tactical leadership program's combat search and rescue training program. Um,
Oh,
that was at yeah, TLP in Spain. So it's basically a training program for NATO people. Um, so I have some experience in leading these missions, and by far the most difficult part of leading one of these missions is coordinating all the communication between the
yeah.
helicopters because they're down low. So your line of sight communication is going to be very difficult. Normally, the helicopters cannot talk to your air traffic control, right? So
Oh,
they can only talk to planes that are higher up and line of sight due to the
right.
curvature of the earth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I get
So
that.
your communication flow is going to be really difficult, and the helicopters are just so slow compared to anything else. You're talking 130 miles per hour, maybe, right, is your
Sure.
max. And that's you,
Max.
you
Yeah.
can basically drive that fast if you think about it.
Yeah.
Um, and their range is not that far either.
Right.
They can fly for 4 hours, but that's still you got to go there and back. So you're talking about a very limited range of where you can actually go out in a quick reaction force or
Uh,
anything with the helicopter,
right.
um, and bring something back. So that's why they have these pre-positioned. They put out fuel. They actually put these secret locations down, caches of fuel where the helicopter can land and refuel. But it takes a ton of logistics setting this up.
Yeah.
So to actually crash retrieve something, yeah, especially using a helicopter, is going to be very limited in your range, right? So the
Right.
best way, yeah, why it totally makes sense to me is they have some way to actually, you know, lure in these objects,
Yeah.
whatever they
Right.
are,
Right.
and then actually knock them down, so stun them or something, and then retrieve them. As crazy as that sounds, but from all these
Right.
interviews I've done, when you actually look into it, you find there's a lot of very interesting UAPs. This last week, I released a UAP from a glider pilot. Very interesting if you check that out. But it was
Yeah.
basically like a 6 foot tall antenna that looked like a lollipop flying around at supersonic speeds. Um,
Right.
so, is that some type of drone system from extraterrestrial? Is that what these beings look like? Is it some like form of life that we've never even heard of? Is it like flying space flies or something? Is it like space insects flying around? We have no idea what the greater universe. It could be that they can lure in these other types of life forms that may not even be an extraterrestrial civilization, if you will. What if it's just some sort of
Yeah.
um, differently evolved space form of life that we don't understand, and they can lure them into a certain area and knock them down, and now reverse engineer to create like this white egg technology that you're talking about.
Oh, I like that. I mean, certainly we've all heard about the five observables, and those observables are from observing UAP. And if you don't have one physically, which possibly have been crash recovered, by observing how they operate, the speeds, the types of physics that are involved, the reason they were looking at the five observables was to build their own. So it's quite possible, that defense contractors and governments have been looking at the type of, can we go at Mach 20, and appear out of nowhere, and be multi-domain craft. I mean, I definitely think that has been investigated. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I like the idea that something might be shot down. And I very much echo your thoughts of life in the universe. I mean, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. I mean, the chances of ET looking or being anything like we know is very low. As the wonderful French UFO and scientist Jacques Vallée says, the highly strange. If it's at flight levels with navigation lights flying level, it's an effing airplane. You know, the genuine UAP, the genuine alien, is going to be something that you have never seen before. This the pole flying at supersonic speeds near a glider is that's a genuine UFO. It's not a flying saucer. It's something really strange, not aerodynamic. That's the good one. Those are the good ones. I really like stories like that. I mean, great. We need to know what they are.
Yeah, I liked it as well. And after I released that video, I got emails. Like you said, we receive emails from all these interested
Yeah, we
parties
do.
out there, and they
Right.
pointed me towards Townsend Brown's
Yeah.
actual electrostatic anti-gravity type of device. And it looked surprisingly similar, actually. There's like an antenna sticking down. It looks like some sort of lollipop type device. What is the most interesting evidence that you found that really led you down this development of looking at alternate technologies?
Oh, all right. Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, it came very much from a background of looking at the history of physics. We have many family friends who are part of the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge, who changed the world of physics by defining how atoms work. We only knew that there was an electron and a proton because of Ernest Rutherford. And when he fired alpha particles through solid gold, he realized that very few of the alpha particles hit the proton at the center. And he described it classically as like shooting a fly in a cathedral. And that changed our perception of physics. But all the time when these physics was being developed by academia, the military looked at it and said, "Ooh, is there something we can exploit?" And the classic story of exploitation of physics is the atomic bomb and the Manhattan Project that turned a blackboard equation from Einstein, who never, ever, ever thought that you could have a chain reaction, but he understood that the energy, the bonds of energy in normal matter, if broken, would release a massive amount of energy. But there was absolutely no way of either splitting the atom or, even more so, having a runaway chain reaction that could become a bomb until we understood neutrons. And then, then suddenly it became possible that one atom split would propagate and make a chain reaction that would split other atoms. And then, very cleverly, military took a physics idea and turned it into the weapon which ended World War II. And the weapon that won World War II was other physics, and that was what was radar. I mean, but very much, if we didn't have the physics of radar or the physics of the atomic bomb, World War II would have lasted longer. And ever since World War II, military have seen the advantage of advanced physics. So I'm looking at all the advanced physics that happened since World War II, such as looking at anti-gravity, such as metamaterials, such as advanced radar, such as synthetic aperture radar, such as phased array, such as stealth. All those things are physics. And there's no reason why advanced physics isn't going on today. I mean, you get little hints from, that Hal Puthoff talks about in James Fox's film. I mean, he obviously works on stuff that he can't talk about, and that's because there's a vast amount of funding at the academic level and DARPA level, and in many countries, looking at building something that your enemy won't know what hit them. And that, and that just fascinates me. I don't want to bust national security, but I want to understand what they're up to. Can we actually modify time? Great questions. Do nuclear weapons still work? What could stop them? Hypersonics, directed energy weapons, and plasma research is just absolutely, it's all fascinating. And the more I dig into it, the more I realize it's real, and the more I want to know about it. So yeah, no, it's a passion of mine.
Excellent. And just specifically on the white egg. So what do you think, just your initial impressions? It's only been a few days, but what's your impression of the advanced technologies that could be on that object?
Well, I think it could well be a buoyant craft. It might well be an experimental high altitude drone system. If you imagine, if you could have a long loitering drone that didn't just have a 24-hour or even a couple of day lifespan of a normal conventional winged powered aircraft drone, but if you could have something like a pseudo satellite that was still in Earth's atmosphere, not in orbit, that could literally bonk hover above an area of interest. And I think that an organization like the NRO and National Reconnaissance Office and other countries would want a long loitering surveillance for visuals and communication and synthetic aperture radar, which is the way of looking at things these days at night and through clouds. It would be brilliant. So it is just possible that the Department of Energy, not the Department of Defense, but the Department of Energy might be working on buoyant craft that have this long loitering capability at extremely high altitudes. We're talking 60,000 feet, a very special place in our atmosphere, a place above flight levels and above the weather, and also very benign in a weird way, very low pressure, way above the capabilities of lift from a conventional aircraft, most conventional aircraft anyway. You'd have to have extremely large lift surfaces. But imagine a buoyant craft that could go up and stay up there in a, say, a kilometer circle and look down over a center of interest. I mean, I was contacted this morning by somebody who said that was possibly what's has been going on over Gaza recently. They wanted long loitering permanent, but not satellite assets, something a pseudo satellite high altitude drones. I mean, the egg is rather emblematic of a shape which under physics and engineering is very good as a pressure vessel. It is rather small though, 20 foot, and the weight of it would have to be overcome by any buoyancy. And what I've been told is that what could make it float isn't hydrogen, isn't helium, but there is one thing which is lighter than hydrogen, which is the smallest element we have in our universe, and that is nothing. So a vacuum drone, imagine an evacuated chamber, would be buoyant. You'd have to make the craft very strong so it didn't implode and become flat. But there are materials these days which would be very good if it was egg-shaped, which should hold the shape under as a vacuum under pressure from the air. I'm interested in exploring whether the egg might be man-made, and it looks rather good engineering to me to be a buoyant craft. And it's very odd. I mean, if you saw an egg, no visible means of propulsion, no flight surfaces, not manned, you would think it was possibly extraterrestrial, but it just might be a test vehicle or an experimental buoyant craft, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess why I think it could be something different is it doesn't match any of the witness testimonies that we've heard, from David Fravor, where it's actually moving very quickly. You have this kind of like a bullet references moving supersonic through the air. So what do you think could be the actual propulsion system? You mentioned electrostatics, but have you seen anything else or advanced physics that you
No, I think that's a really good point. I think first of all, I'd like just to make a big point to you and the audience here today, is that I certainly get an awful lot of people saying to me, you're saying it's man-made, it's a drone, but we've been seeing these for hundreds of years. Well, yeah, sure. My T-shirt says UAP are real. UFOs are all different. We can't make, just because something is a man-made drone doesn't mean that what your Aunt Maud saw landing in her field in Wisconsin in the 1950s was the same. I'm not saying they're the same. For example, Foo Fighters only seem to appear in Europe and in the Pacific theater between 1939 and 1945. It doesn't mean that that things seen earlier and later were German. I mean, I think every case needs to be assessed separately. That's my big statement. And how an egg, a dirigible vacuum craft would actually work, I think it is going to be rather lumbering and slow. I think its only capability it would have would be a reasonably fast ascent and descent. I don't think it would have any zippy horizontal movement because it wouldn't need to. It would just need to be launched, ascend to its buoyant flight level, 60,000+ feet, and long loitering hover in a zone that it could, using vast amounts of solar power, make very small thrusters, keep it in that zone. I think if something is zipping around at Mach levels horizontally, it's not a buoyant craft. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. but I think things that go up reasonably fast and descend, but at normal physics levels. I mean, I think what Commander Fravor saw, it seemed to go up very fast. I don't see how a buoyant craft would do that I would understand, unless it has some other type of anti-gravity or some other kind of propulsion, which is even more secret than a drone. I don't know. Um, I, I just want to understand what physics is out there and what we might be doing.
And for your audience on your successful YouTube channel, what resonates most with them? Is it your looking into
Yeah.
extraterrestrials, or is it into UAP technology specifically? What do you think is the most resonating part?
I think that the I've really fallen between two stools with my channel, because a lot of people tune in because a lot of the subjects deal with UFOs and UAP, and then they tune in and here's me with guests saying, talking about the physics of and physics of man-made craft, and I think that has definitely alienated a lot of audience who have on their wall a poster that says "I believe." Now, I don't actually believe in very much, actually. I really don't even believe in disclosure. I If I did believe in anything, I would believe in science, and I would believe and would require confirmation. So I think there is a bit of a split with my viewers. A whole bunch of them really like what I'm doing, and they enjoy looking at advanced physics, and they like somebody being as open-minded as you, as a guest, or Ashton Forbes. Who knows what's out there? It's worth, talking about these things, but I don't blindly believe in extraterrestrial UFOs. I actually want proof. And that's why the Rendlesham Forest incident is one of the best incidents that ever happened, sadly, because people were injured and their injuries are emblematic of what they were injured by. And so for me, that was what got me. Suddenly I talked to, John Burroughs and others who, actually, you could look up in a table what injured you and what frequencies were involved. That's what Gary Nolan and Kit Green from the CIA actually did. Um, they were injured by frequencies which might be unknown, and that's very interesting.
Hmm. You received a lot of attention, positive and negative, right? Your breakthrough listen candidate one really went viral, and I was very happy to see it on in mainstream news. I saw it on Sabine Hossenfelder's
Mhm.
channel. I think she shot it down, unfortunately. So you've received a lot of positive and negative comments, and we talked on your channel as well. So if anyone is interested in seeing more discussion, go to Professor Simon's YouTube channel, and we talk a lot more on Jake Barber, etc. But how is it being a public figure, and especially with this BLC one? How has that experience been?
Yeah, I mean, I woke up after the kind of news broke. It was picked up by the Daily Mirror science writer who then syndicated it worldwide. And suddenly I was in Paris Match magazine and the New York Post, and the Adelaide Chronicle, whatever. I was all over the world. And it was a very strange, people in my local bar here in France went, Monsieur Professor, the alien guy. It was interesting. It's like, oh crap, they all know about it. And I think it was a really important story. I felt very much I was uh, pushing boundaries, and I think that Sabina Horstenfeld, she was actually reasonably nice about it. But other channels were really nasty, and they tended to come from a very conventional science peer-reviewed paper background, where if it wasn't peer reviewed and in the normal press, we're not believing it.
Yeah.
And, I'm prepared to look outside of peer-reviewed stuff. And actually, when I heard about BLC, Breakthrough Listening Candidate 1, from a senior European radio astronomer, he told me it was real. And I went, well, that means we're not alone in the universe. And I thought it was definitely a big story worth covering. And I think it's way complicated. I think the signal is real. I think today in 2025, we have the tools with the James Webb Space Telescope to find biological signatures, which I think we probably have on different exoplanets. I think we've got enough evidence to say to the general public of the world that we have good confirmation that we are no longer alone in our universe. There's life of some sort, whether it's bacterial or it's Mr. Blobby. I don't care. I just want to know that we as humans and all the other wonderful life on our planet is not the only occurrence of salient life in the universe, which makes sense to me. But why that story was repressed, why it seemed to be a big backlash with conventional science just jumping on me, and probably what they were doing is that they secretly, I believe a number of them knew that the story is correct, but this just wasn't the right time to release it. That's what I heard from SETI representatives. So I think you'll look back on 2024 and go, that mad bloke with the funny hair in France might have actually had a good story when eventually it comes out, as the truth needs to be out there.
When, why do you think they would suppress it, that we're not ready? What does that mean?
Yeah, no, that I immediately got back to my radio telescope contact and said, why are they effing on me? Why? God, I've been hung out to dry on this. And he said, I'm not surprised, because there's supposedly there was a little known report that SETI commissioned by an eminent elderly scientist who said, don't tell the people. And I said, well, but SETI's whole principle is that it's searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. So if you find a decent signal, BLC1's pretty good, why don't you tell everybody that it's real? And supposedly, the SETI study said we need to be at least 3 steps ahead. It's no good saying, I think we've got pretty good confirmation, because it's a massive thing to tell to the human race that we're not alone. And I think what the report told SETI is immediately the media will say, what do they look like? What are they saying? What are we talking to them? And of course, the answer is no. We just have detected a buzz or a biological signature of breathing of a bacteria on an exoplanet. I mean, we're not talking to them. So the report told SETI, keep quiet until you're at least 2 steps ahead, because if you don't, if you're not 2 steps ahead, you will appear like an idiot, because people will want to know the next big question and you won't have the answer. So wait until you've got a few steps ahead of the general public before you tell the media. That was what that report said. Whether that's actually happened, because I kind of suspect that Breakthrough Listen, the Yuri Milner funded organization, would want to actually break the news. I mean, I think that's their aim, really, is they've certainly put a lot of money into telescope time to search for both technological and biological signatures of ET. So you'd think that they would be kind of supportive of saying that the signal BLC1, which was a good candidate, and other things. I mean, what have they done since? They've gone really quiet. I want to know what they're up to. And I think maybe there's a bit of a let's not tell people going on. That's what I am assuming. I
So do
mean,
you
I think
think?
they've got biological signatures. There's a group in Cambridge who did use the James Webb Space Telescope to look at the spectral analysis of a different, not the BLC planet, BLC-1 planet, but a different exoplanet that looked as the planet crossed its solar disk. You can look through the exoplanet's atmosphere, and you can see what's in the atmosphere. And they did that, and they found signs of a biological life to the point where, it would prove that it was bugs, it was whatever. It had the kind of chemicals in the atmosphere of this separate exoplanet that James Webb did the telescope time on to kind of prove that there's something down there of some living organism. Again, I mean, it's a long way away, and it might be too early to release. But I think, Chris, in 2025, we have the tools right now, right in the world to actually prove that we're not alone in the universe. And I think we should tell the people, in my opinion.
Do you think the cover up? I mean, obviously that is a cover up, right? If they have
Yeah,
information, they're not releasing for certain said reasons. Do you think the
yeah.
cover up could be related to a cover up of physics? Since the 1930s, 1940s, could it be related to this whole crash retrieval program? They're trying to keep this secret along with the physics.
Oh, I like, yeah, exactly. That's a fantastic linkage. It's quite possible that certainly crash retrieval UAPs have been studied for their physics to possibly weaponize them. And if we have actually had contact in some way or retrieved craft. I mean, that also immediately not only discloses that there are things visiting, but it discloses that we're not alone in the universe. So just the same as a biological signature, a crash retrieval of an extraterrestrial UAP UFO would prove that we are not unique. So yeah, good point, Chris. Yeah.
Because if they say, oh, it turns out we do have biomarkers
Yeah.
and it's not just one planet, let's say it's all around us. What if we start picking up biomarkers, from all around us? Now we're
Right.
saying, uh-oh, it's not that we're totally alone in the universe. It's actually the complete opposite, that maybe
Mm.
we're actually surrounded by life and we're just not that important, right? We're
Right.
not that planet that the aliens are
Mm.
just dying to come visit, It would also, if we're if the universe is teeming with life, for instance, and you have like these flying lollipop things just
Mm.
going around, um, then it really seems like it would give credence to this idea of what Jake Barber has proposed, that there's these crash retrieval sites. He said that his site was
Uh,
actually able to lure and shoot down and capture 1 to 2 UAPs a year. So
wow.
it's almost like if our science admits that actually, oh no, there are biomarkers, not just that system, but almost every system we look, or many, many systems, it
Yeah.
seems like it would cue off science to be like, wait a minute, so could it be possible that they are here? And maybe you start looking at this, uh, the actual science of or evidence that aliens are actually here and have been here for a long time.
I think something is here. I think there is a presence on Earth. I think that the phenomenon, which I kind of relate to more than physical craft, that I find harder to accept. I think the phenomenon that is real and has been seen for hundreds, thousands of years in many countries, in all countries, is evidence that that there is something else out there which isn't life as we know it. It could well be an exotic force of nature that we don't fully understand. It might be a transport mechanism from a way of sending a probe to us, little us on Earth, and to investigate us. Um, it makes more sense to send a exotic physics energy based probe to Earth. There's evidence that the UAP seems salient. Certainly, pilots who have seen plasma and other things in the air have said in a lot of cases that it seems to take evasive action, and that evasive action principle is very, very emblematic of consciousness. I think we tend to recoil from things that would harm us, and we see that in all life. So, is the plasma, which we're definitely seeing, UAP are real? I say again, is it a contact, an alien contact, or some exotic stuff which is visiting Earth? I think that's very, very possible. I just have a problem with physical craft. If I was an alien, I would probably send a probe. I certainly wouldn't fly here. I wouldn't descend through our atmosphere and land. I would have a probe on the moon, circling the sun, hidden in the asteroid belt, or something of advanced physics which isn't really visible. That's what I think.
It sounds like you were initially a skeptic, and then Rendlesham Forest really changed your view. I had a similar experience. I was totally
Ah,
a skeptic until David Fravor's account, and since he was a fighter pilot, it really
yeah.
just
Uh,
totally opened my mind. And once you open your mind, and then you realize from the other side that your beliefs have been limited, and that's really why I just wouldn't even look over there, because there's nothing over there to see. So I had all these limiting beliefs. So I guess along your journey, what have you learned about? You mentioned the phenomenon being here for thousands of years. What
hmm.
what do you think it means to be human? Have you learned any deep insights? And I don't mean to get into religion here, but I want to ask,
No.
have you learned what
Well, I
it
think
means?
religion is part of it. No, I definitely, in fact, I think religion is very, very tied into it, because I think that a lot of our religious belief systems from multi-denominational religions throughout the world tend to have a similar kind of message, is that the universe is connected, that there is a higher entity, is that there is somehow that we have a purpose. And I think, interestingly, from modern emergent science, is I think the science of consciousness is revealing that we might well have a near field subatomic quantum consciousness, which we as far field flesh and blood big creatures can tap into. I think some of the research done by SRI in remote viewing looks very much like some remote viewers can tap into this quantum subatomic consciousness, which probably transcends time, because a lot of the remote viewing wasn't about viewing over distance, it was about viewing over time.
Mm.
So many of the remote viewing experiments needed to have this thing called confirmation. So a classic case was this very famous remote viewer who was asked by the CIA to find a downed spy plane in Africa, and she didn't know where it was, and she made a 30-mile radius circle on Zaire, and when assets on the ground went and looked at that circle, they found the aircraft. And then later, this is the really interesting point, later it was confirmed that she was right, and she was lauded by President Carter and for finding the plane. What the remote viewer people, Hal Puthoff and Russell Turg, have told me, and Uri Geller, is that the confirmation in the future, her future, that she was right, and as an emotional effect on her, was visible in her past. So when she looked and thought, people are asking me where this plane is? I don't know. Oh, hang on a minute. I remember being told where it is in my future. So she drew a circle on Zaire. Do you get the point? That if you can transcend time, if you can look into something that happens in the future, maybe you can win the lottery. I don't know. I and that all points towards consciousness, and that points back to religion, because I think it's all part of who we are as humans.
Wow. Well, thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you, Professor Simon. Anyone interested to hear more of
pleasure.
your videos, I'm sure go to your amazing channel. I love checking in there and seeing, especially like alternate theories on the white egg, the aerogel, the vacuum drone theory. I think is quite interesting. So, how
Good. Yeah. Yeah,
what
thank
would
you very
you?
much. And me, I enjoy your channel too, Chris. It's great. Coming up are some really fascinating interviews. My diary is full of people who are going to be reaching out and talking to me, like you, in the near future. So expect some quite insightful stuff. One of the things that I will tease you about right now is hopefully an interview talking about advanced material science in the aerospace industry, how since World War II, some alloys and metamaterials have become very, very important in the aerospace industry. And I think that's another chip behind the curtain to stuff that we need to understand, to that might shed light on what's really going on. So it was great meeting you again today, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Simon. We'll do it again for sure, mate. Have a great rest of your day.
And you.